Think about your to-do list. Is it made of clear steps, or does it look more like finish project, eat better, or figure out life? That's not really a to-do list, that's a stress list. And research shows why this feels so heavy. Workplace engagement is low, daily stress is high, and vague goals pile on top of both. If you've ever balanced classes, a side hustle, and a part-time job while staring at a list like that, you know the overwhelm. Here's the good part. Marcus Aurelius once turned private notes into clear decisions. In this video, you'll learn to do the same with a simple 4-step system you can start today. Because when tasks stop being vague guesses and start being clear rules, the fog lifts, and suddenly the real challenge becomes visible. Why overwhelm is skyrocketing in 2025. In 2025, the numbers tell a clear story. Only about 1 in 5 employees feels genuinely engaged at work, and nearly half report experiencing significant daily stress. That means most of the workforce begins each day with a sense of distraction or fatigue already hanging over them. This isn't just an issue of long hours. Researchers at UC Irvine have shown that office workers are interrupted roughly every 3 minutes, and once disrupted, it can take nearly 23 minutes to find full focus again. When you overlay vague goals on top of this constant fragmentation, the result is overwhelm that compounds minute by minute. At first glance, people assume the overload comes entirely from too many tasks or hyper-connected technology. Notifications ping all day long, emails never stop, responsibilities pile up across countless apps. Those things clearly matter, but they are only part of the picture. What really multiplies stress is the way the mind reacts when instructions are unclear. A hazy task saps more cognitive energy than an actual heavy workload, because uncertainty demands extra interpretation at every glance. Imagine writing "finish project" at the top of your planner. Each time you see it, your chest tightens slightly. You hesitate. Which part of the project? Do you need help from a teammate? Is it due this week or next month? Nothing in that phrase gives you traction. Instead of moving forward, you cycle through questions. A task that looked simple now feels paralyzing because your brain turned one vague phrase into a dozen unknowns. The hesitation spreads. Soon, minutes become hours lost not in the work itself, but in decoding what the work even is. This is how overwhelm grows so quickly. Clear tasks feed momentum. Vague tasks stall it immediately. The human brain evolved to close loops, identifiable, specific problems that can be solved and set aside. When a task is open-ended, the loop never closes. Every glance at it re-triggers the pressure. The stress is not about the actual hours demanded, but about the energy drained by indecision. This is why people arrive at the end of a busy day feeling depleted, without being able to name what they truly accomplished. We often expect that a new app or productivity tool will fix this problem. A sleek digital calendar, a task manager powered by AI, new reminders that sync across devices, these feel like order. But moving "finish project" from paper to an app doesn't change its vagueness. You just dressed up the same uncertainty in cleaner design. The mind still stalls when it gets there, because no tool can replace the need for clarity in the task itself. This mental friction consumes enormous time. A 2023 survey found that American workers lose an average of 6.5 hours each week to distractions, adding up to 13 working days every year. And that's just external chatter. Coworkers walking by, household chores for those at home, even pets tapping for attention. Add vague goals on top of that baseline and the cost doubles, because your brain is distracted not only from outside, but from inside as well. What actually exhausts people is less about raw task load than the repeated collision with fuzzy thoughts. Each time you stare at an undefined instruction, your stress spikes slightly, and over the day these spikes pile up into fatigue. Contrast that with the clarity of something like, at 10 o'clock, draft page 1 of the report. Suddenly, there's no hesitation. 10 arrives, the page gets written. The loop closes cleanly. That single shift eliminates the extra guesswork that drains energy. This draining effect reveals why so many professionals believe they need longer hours or stronger willpower. In reality, hours vanish in those small spaces of indecision. When you multiply dozens of unclear instructions across an entire week, you can easily lose entire days. On the other hand, converting each vague intention into a simple instruction reclaims time that seemed unavailable. The workload itself hasn't shrunk, but the wasted cycles of hesitation disappear. Some might argue jobs are simply heavier today than ever before. More meetings, more admin work, emails and data requests crossing time zones all night. That's real. Yet surveys from 2025 show that knowledge workers spend nearly 5 hours a week just on low-value administrative updates, with many reporting even more. It's not just the presence of tasks, but the way those tasks come unstructured, undefined, and endless. Without clarity, each little demand balloons into something that threatens to block the entire day. The paradox of mental overload is that people respond by adding things. More apps, more notes, more hacks. Yet what reduces stress is subtraction, the subtraction of vagueness. A task reframed into a clear step frees the brain to act. Instead of forcing energy into interpreting what finished project means, you save that energy for the act of writing, coding, or replying. The difference feels immediate because what weighed you down was never the task itself, but the way your brain struggled to outline it. Neuroscientists often describe the brain's preference for simple loops. A defined next step is a loop with a beginning and an end. Carrying out the step closes it, producing a sense of completion that feeds motivation. But a vague intention is a loop that never closes. It reopens every time you're reminded of it, dragging stress with it each time. Multiply this across 10, 20, or 50 such half-defined intentions, and you end up with the very thing surveys measure. Workers who are busy all day, yet depleted by night, unsure of what was actually achieved. When you reframe tasks into precise instructions, loops close cleanly. The stress signals stop repeating, and the freed energy makes it possible to sustain focus through the day. The shift doesn't require exotic tools. It requires the discipline to capture goals in clear form, to define a next action in unambiguous language. Once the pattern becomes consistent, mental space that was lost to indecision starts coming back. That is when productivity begins to feel less like strain and more like flow. This helps explain why engagement levels remain so low even as tools and technology grow more advanced. Without clarity of thought, all the dashboards in the world cannot prevent stress from spreading. Workers believe time is the scarce resource. What they often lack isn't time, it's definition. When hours are spent circling vague loops, stress compounds. When those loops are closed by clarity, both time and energy expand. And it's not only modern workers who prove this point. History shows the same lesson in different clothing. Leaders in far messier times had to govern without apps, dashboards, or constant notifications, yet they found ways to maintain calm focus. The difference was not in the tools at hand, but in the clarity of the thinking they carried. And that brings us to an unlikely teacher whose notes survived from 2,000 years ago, offering a method surprisingly practical for overloaded minds today. Marcus Aurelius's not-so-boring secret. When you hear the name Marcus Aurelius, the image that comes to mind is often a stern emperor writing heavy philosophy in marble halls. But his way of thinking was not about poetry or abstract speculation. It was a method for survival. He ran an empire stretched thin by wars, politics, and even plague. In that environment, vague decisions could cost lives. To manage it, he reduced complexity into plain notes, short, strict reminders to guide his own behavior. That's the real secret. Marcus wasn't writing for an audience or for history, he was writing for himself. And those notes worked like mental engineering, turning intense uncertainty into clear, usable instructions. His writing was not dressed up in rhetoric. It looked more like blunt self-commands. Imagine someone under pressure jotting down a line just to stay anchored. If anger rises, then remember patience. If fear appears, then act calmly. These were not performances for others to admire. They were private frameworks for action. He didn't produce eloquent scrolls, he produced working notes that told him what to do when emotion or distraction threatened. That's why they survived. They show a leader practicing discipline of thought with the simplest possible tools: a pen, paper, and immediate instructions. Modern professionals have access to information streams far beyond anything Marcus could imagine. Graphs update in real time, dashboards display every metric, countless reminders pop on screen. And yet, people today often report feeling more scattered and more drained. The gap is striking. Marcus faced troops at the frontier, unpredictable politics, and outbreaks of disease, stressors heavier in scale but clearer in structure. Leaders now face overloaded inboxes and non-stop notifications, which should be trivial in comparison, yet seem just as paralyzing. The difference lies not in the objective weight of responsibilities, but in the approach to clarity. We chase speed, he chased definition. This is why his notes feel so practical today. He used them to strip a situation down to its root before trying to act. Instead of rushing, he clarified cause and effect. If circumstance X occurs, then my action is Y. That formula gave him traction on chaos. And this is where his habit connects directly to a tool you can use. Psychologists today call these short statements implementation intentions, clear if-then rules that make follow-through far easier. Marcus didn't use that phrase, but the habit is identical. He wrote condition-to-action lines not because it was elegant, but because it worked. And you can copy that. The value doesn't come just from the words, it comes from the simplicity. Once you phrase a stressor as a concrete, if this, then that, your brain no longer burns energy in interpretation. The loop closes. That was his method of resilience. In place of abstract worries, he created cues that linked directly to behavior. When anger surged, he had a line prepared. When fear arrived, he had a counter ready. The pattern reaffirmed itself day after day. Thoughts shrunk into rules, rules guided action, action built confidence. He engineered steadiness through clarity. A comparison with today highlights the gap. Imagine Marcus in a modern office, Slack alerts flooding his laptop. Most people drown in the stream of reactions and threads. He would look at the distractions, grab a notebook, and rewrite the situation into a single line. If a message does not require principle, ignore. If it does require principle, act immediately. That sentence would filter an avalanche into clarity. We, with all our apps and organizational tools, often dodge that step. We leave intentions vague and spin in circles. He had fewer tools but a stronger habit, and that habit mattered more. The temptation is to explain away his stability by saying Rome was different. And certainly, in physical terms, his world was more brutal, which makes his approach more remarkable. The reality is that the habit of writing clear instructions helped him reduce even life-or-death events into manageable pieces. That habit was not philosophy in an abstract sense, it was strategy for functioning. He didn't frame his meditations as lofty theory. He framed them as a soldier's checklists for mental survival. That's why they sound almost plain compared to later philosophers, because they were designed for action, not debate. Now look at the overlap with daily modern stress. Your stakes may not involve wars and plagues, but the sensation of fog feels familiar. The boss gives an assignment like improve team performance without clear metrics. The effect is hesitation. What does that mean? How do you measure it? Where do you even start? Marcus never left instructions in that form. If someone gave him a broad demand, he would translate it into a rule. If performance is weak, then schedule training. If morale drops, then meet with commanders. Notice the difference. Movement becomes possible when phrased with clarity. Modern professionals can do the same translation today. This is the deeper point. Overwhelm is rarely about the workload itself and almost always about vagueness. Once you cut through the fog with a direct instruction, even complex goals become actionable. That is the same loop Marcus practiced: clarify, act, repeat. And today, research confirms it works. Studies on implementation intentions show that simple if-then plans double the likelihood of follow-through. They turn intentions into cues. Marcus found the same rule centuries earlier by trial and necessity. He wrote down instructions and followed them. From the outside, it looks almost boring. In practice, it was liberating. Consider how this shrinks fear. A vague threat feels massive because it is undefined. But when you capture it in a line like, if crisis appears, then focus on this first step, fear subsides. Marcus returned to this technique constantly. Break problems into steps, phrase each as a condition and response, and execute the response. For him, clarity was the weapon that defeated paralysis. And the same effect shows up in today's workplace. Big demands like streamline operations paralyze until reframed into, if it's Monday morning, then audit this single process. Suddenly progress starts, and progress itself generates calm. Some dismiss philosophy as irrelevant to practical stress. But for Marcus, philosophy was nothing abstract. He did not write to impress future readers or to win acclaim. His notes weren't public works, they were engineering for the mind. That's why they feel sharp even now. They reduce complicated leadership dilemmas into direct responses that anyone could adapt. And that's also why they endure. They are grounded not in Roman culture, but in universal clarity. Strip away the time period, and what remains is practical mental practice. It might even frustrate some to see how effective such a simple method could be. Workers today chase apps, hacks, and tools when the Emperor of Rome managed chaos with short condition action lines in a notebook. But that contrast is the entire insight. Clarity beats complexity. It did then, and it does now. If you carry away one lesson from Marcus, it is this: stop interpreting, stop guessing, stop living inside vagueness. Write the rule, make the link, anchor the action. That converts stressor into step, and step into progress. And here is where the practical bridge forms. His secret wasn't mystical thought or perfect calm. It was very small formulas. If X happens, then I do Y. That method, known now as the if-then rule, scales as easily to daily nutrition choices as it did to matters of empire. By using it, Marcus steadied his throne. By using it, you can steady your workload. Clear thought shrinks vague goals into movements you can actually start. Overwhelm doesn't vanish by wishing it away. It vanishes by framing what to do next. Which brings us to the modern application. Think about the types of goals that appear on your own list. Eat better. Work out more. Be productive. They sit there as broad wishes, frustrating you. You tell yourself they're simple, but when the time comes, you hesitate. Why? Because without clarity, the brain has no direct trigger to act. That hesitation is the modern version of chaos. And the tool Marcus used is the same one you can now adapt, converting a vague stress list into clear rules that actually move you forward. Turning stress lists into action plans. Why does a task like eat better seem so simple on paper yet impossible to act on? The words sound positive, even motivating, but the moment you see them on a list, momentum stops. The problem sits in their construction. Eat better tells you nothing about what, when, or how. It leaves the actual decision-making incomplete, like a jigsaw with missing pieces. That open gap between intention and instruction creates friction, and every time you stare at the unfinished puzzle, hesitation grows. Unclear goals aren't harmless placeholders. They create recurring friction every time you revisit them. Each encounter with Eat Better restarts the same guessing cycle. Should you cook, order differently, snack less, or rearrange portions? None of these choices are clear in advance, so the decision process repeats again and again. Contrast that with, if it's noon, then I'll eat a protein-rich lunch. The statement already decides for you. Noon signals the behavior, and no inner debate is required. The loop is closed. Psychology research shows if-then planning automates decisions and reduces reliance on in-the-moment willpower. The task translates from an indefinite hope into a defined action. That difference explains why vague tasks often stall progress and why consistent clarity restores momentum. Without definition, the brain burns energy trying to translate a blurry goal into specifics on the fly. With if-then framing, those choices are front-loaded. Execution feels automatic because the question of what to do was already settled earlier. Motivation stops leaking into constant deliberation and instead channels directly into action. Take something broad like reply to emails. Even with good intentions, it stirs resistance. There are too many options. Which emails? Which order? How long should you spend? Reframe it as, if it's 9 a.m., then I'll reply to the 3 latest client emails. Boundaries emerge. You know when to start, which messages to address, and how to finish. 9 o'clock arrives, your brain follows the instruction, and closure happens. No extra negotiation. Sometimes people assume this approach is restrictive, like boxing in their freedom. In practice, it's the opposite. Without clear instructions, the brain reopens each decision dozens of times a day. That micro-scale hesitation drains time and confidence. Each delay fuels the suspicion that you lack discipline or drive. When if-then rules serve as the guide, the pattern reverses. Small wins reinforce your confidence quietly, and the brain begins to expect follow-through as a normal rhythm. Instead of debating with yourself all day, you're completing loops and collecting momentum. Think about exercise more. That phrase towers over you like a vague promise. The brain delays because the path isn't fixed. Is it running today, yoga, lifting, or walking? By evening, you've already spent energy negotiating possibilities. Now reframe. If it's Tuesday at 6 p.m., then I'll do a 20-minute bodyweight circuit. Time, place, and action condense into one line. The moment Tuesday evening appears, there's no question of what's required. Progress isn't imagined anymore, it's scheduled. This works because vagueness compounds stress. A dozen hazy tasks operate like open loops demanding constant attention. Each glance triggers small bursts of uncertainty. That's why lists filled with aspirations feel heavier than they look. Replace them with if-then statements, and those same tasks form a sequence of executable steps. The list feels lighter without shrinking, because vagueness, not the number of tasks, was the true weight. And the central mistake is that most people never attempt this translation step. They write vaguely, assume it's enough, then blame themselves later when nothing moves. They call it lack of focus, laziness, or procrastination, when the real cause was absence of clarity. Imagine driving a route with a GPS that only says, go north. Every turn would be a pause, guessing whether that's still correct. But if the GPS gave precise turns, motion would remain continuous. If-then rules create that same effect for your daily work. Consider procrastination more closely. People imagine they're avoiding hard work, but often they're avoiding the fog. Walking into a task with no specific start feels disorienting. The mind resists not because effort is unbearable, but because confusion threatens wasted effort. Create a condition action link, and the fog lifts. The act that once felt like avoidance now feels mechanical. The trigger occurs, the routine runs. Procrastination fades because there is no longer a problem to solve at entry. It's already been solved. Take clean the house as another test. Standing in front of it, the meaning could stretch across dozens of chores. Vacuuming, dishes, laundry, maybe closets and shelves. The ambiguity grows louder the more you consider it. Recast it into, if it's Saturday morning, then I'll vacuum the living room and wash the dishes. Suddenly, a mountain collapses into 2 steps. Once they're finished, the loop is closed with satisfying finality. You can always add another rule for the next phase, but crucially, each micro-win has been defined and completed. Even distractions yield more easily to this clarity framing. Work on presentation tempts drifting. You might open slides, then lose half an hour choosing colors. If reframed as, if it's 2 p.m., then I'll draft 3 bullet points for the opening slide, the temptation narrows. The action is so specific that detours seem noisy by comparison. Focus becomes viable because the path doesn't branch. Completion happens fast, rewarding focus and reducing future temptation. Behind all these examples lies the way the brain routes instructions. A clear instruction runs along action pathways, trigger and response, almost automatic. A vague intention veers into deliberation pathways, ongoing loops of questioning. This explains why if-then planning works so consistently. It reprograms daily triggers into defined responses, avoiding the mental toll of repeated deliberation. Pilots rely on checklists not to reduce skill, but to remove costly hesitation. If-then thinking does the same for daily routines, preventing mental drift. What matters most is starting small. You don't need to rebuild your life overnight. Begin with one vague entry that annoys you, maybe eat better or get organized. Ask what moment triggers it and what specific action defines progress. Write that down as an if-then. The act itself demonstrates the method. Almost instantly, the vague stress shrinks to a manageable step. As the practice repeats, you'll see how natural it becomes. Soon, your tasks no longer look like unresolved puzzles, but like sequences of clear moves stacked together. And here's a quick challenge. Pick one thing off your current list that feels foggy. Rewrite it as an if-then statement right now. Something as small as, if it's noon, then I'll eat a protein lunch. Take a moment, write yours in the comments. It locks the idea in your mind, and you may find it useful to see how others frame theirs. Even one translated task proves clarity to yourself. The impact accumulates quickly. Every completed step builds a small sense of closure. Closure reinforces confidence, and confidence builds willingness to move on the next clear step. Momentum grows not from dramatic breakthroughs, but from steady progress along clear paths. Workloads rarely shrink, yet overwhelm decreases because the fog dissolves. What burdened you wasn't the amount of work, but the blur of unclear intentions. With practice, the habit of translating them lowers that blur until your lists are less about stress and more about steady, navigable action. And that raises an important question. If setting clear rules for tasks helps so much, why do so many people return to vague intentions in the first place? Sometimes it's habit. Sometimes it's the belief that writing more detail is wasted time compared to working harder. Yet history and research alike suggest the opposite. Success comes from structured clarity, not endless effort. Which naturally opens another question. How do you make space to refine your thinking regularly enough that tasks don't collapse back into vagueness? That shift starts with a practice many overlook, deliberately pausing to reflect. Reflection, the 10-minute super habit. Most people think that high performers succeed because they grind longer hours than anyone else. The truth is, many of them actually stop working for a short stretch each day. They pause to think back through what just happened, how they handled it, and what they want to do differently tomorrow. It seems counterintuitive. Why stop when there's already too much to finish? But the pause itself is what converts daily struggle into progress. Without it, the same mistakes repeat. With it, you're equipping yourself with a clearer map before the next round even begins. That's why reflection has been called a super habit. 10 minutes of review each evening can reshape the way an entire week unfolds. History gives us one example of this. Marcus Aurelius kept nightly notes where he examined the emotions and decisions that had tested him throughout the day. He didn't write as a philosopher looking for posterity. He wrote blunt reminders meant to guide his actions the next morning. We can see today how effective that habit was. Compressing reflection into a short ritual created mental stability in conditions most of us would consider chaos. Modern journaling plays the same role. A few sentences focused on what worked and what didn't draws a line under the day and sets up a stronger response for the next. And current research supports what he practiced. In a controlled Harvard Business School study, workers who spent just 15 minutes at the end of each day reflecting improved their task performance by about 23% over those who didn't. The method was simple. Note what went well and what could be improved, but the payoff was measurable across weeks. Even more telling, people who only reflected privately improved almost as much as those who reflected and then shared. This shows reflection's power isn't in impressing others. The benefit comes directly from turning vague impressions into specific lessons. Think about this in daily work. Without closing the loop at the end of the day, recurring problems carry forward untouched. A meeting in which someone dominates the time will still be dominated next week. Miscommunication with a teammate today repeats itself next project. With reflection, you see these patterns before they harden. A note like, "I overloaded my stand-up briefing. Tomorrow summarize in 3 lines," sets up tomorrow's behavior so the same error doesn't take root. In that sense, reflection is cheaper and more effective than endless effort. You correct sooner, and the correction compounds. Sometimes reflection surfaces its value in the sharp contrast between clarity and vagueness. We've all scribbled motivational fluff, do better, work harder, and months later it reads like satire. Compare that with, keep stand-up under 1 minute. The second statement cuts through fog and gives you an action you'll actually take. Reflection creates a forcing function. Instead of recording an empty wish, you rewrite the day's lesson into specific, testable instruction. Next time, there's no second guessing. The most common objection goes like this: I don't have time. It feels impossible to spare minutes when projects already spill across the evening. Yet reflection is not a time sink, it's an amplifier. 10 minutes spent clarifying the day saves hours of drift tomorrow. Imagine 2 teammates. One finishes work and immediately shuts the laptop. The other writes down one clear adjustment. The next day, the first repeats yesterday's inefficiencies. The second trims them away. Scale that difference across weeks, and you'll find the one who spent 10 minutes is now far ahead of the one who spent none. It also changes the weight of the day emotionally. Stress lingers when the mind stores only frustrations. Ending the evening with a small positive reflection, naming what went right, brings balance. In fact, studies show stress levels fall when workers close the day naming their wins. A reflection habit doesn't mean ignoring problems. It means getting an accurate picture, the errors to fix, and the progress to protect. You lay down to rest with clarity, not just tension. The beauty of reflection is in its flexibility. Some people write a short note in a journal before bed. Others skip writing and practice a structured technique built for quick use. Here are a few you can try. The 2-minute emotion check-in. Before walking into a meeting, pause for roughly 120 seconds. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now, and how might it shape this conversation? This single reflection helps you notice a tense state before it slips into your words. Research shows people who used this practice made 31% fewer mistakes in communication. The impact reflection. Pick one work interaction at the end of the day, maybe a chat with a colleague, maybe an email thread, and ask, how did my actions affect the other person? What signals did I notice in their reaction? Approaching the day with this lens makes you more tuned in to your influence. Miscommunications shrink, trust expands. Over time, that one question builds connection across an entire team. The assumption detector. When conflict sparks, stop and ask, what assumptions am I making about their intentions or ability? This reflection breaks false stories before they contaminate the relationship. Most workplace tension is not born out of clear evidence, but out of guesses filling in gaps. Catching them prevents spirals that consume hours. Even feedback can be processed through reflection. A 4-step routine is straightforward. First, absorb feedback silently. Next, name your emotional reaction without judgment. Third, separate the person from the message. Fourth, note one action you can take. What might have felt like a personal attack instead becomes raw material for growth. Reflection filters heat into clarity. Weekly reflection adds another dimension. A 5-minute success and setback review asks for 2 inputs, one win, one stumble. For each, link the outcome to a quality you displayed: patience, clarity, disorganization, haste. This balances perception, showing you both strong roots and weak spots. Without this, people swing between inflated confidence and harsh self-criticism. Weekly reflection fixes the scale. The workplace impact is tangible. Teams working through new projects face unknowns daily. When they gather for a short reflection, naming what was confusing, what was effective, what to try next, progress accelerates. Stress falls. Even difficult days feel meaningful because mistakes are recast as learning. The cycle of reflection becomes the cycle of adaptation. Leaders who embed these practices see errors drop and morale climb. Mistakes don't become shame markers, they become quick adjustments. Reflection can be extremely simple. It doesn't require lengthy journal entries. You don't need to write a page of emotional depth. The force lies in precision. A single sentence holding a lesson is worth more than a vague page. Write, cut presentation intro to 2 minutes. That's enough. Over months, small sentences stack into a reliable track record of improved action. Sporadic, heavy reflection will never outproduce that steady accumulation. This is why reflection has been called the 10-minute superhabit. Unlike many productivity hacks, it feeds directly into clarity and better choices the next day, without demanding complex tools or large blocks of time. A notebook, a pen, and commitment to 10 minutes. That's all. Try it as a short experiment. For 5 evenings this week, write one sentence about what you learned that day. At the end, look back. You'll see fewer repeat mistakes and more specific instructions filling your page. Even in 5 days, the payoff is noticeable. And when you glance back at those notes later, you'll understand their compounding value. A logbook full of vague reminders does little. A logbook full of direct actions becomes a blueprint for growth. Patterns emerge, lessons repeat less often, and progress feels concrete. That shift is what separates days that blur together from days that keep building on themselves. The effect scales not only in efficiency, but decision quality. Reflection stops wasted cycles and guides energy more intelligently. It acts behind the scenes, adjusting your course each day in ways you might not notice until weeks have passed. The returns are invisible at first, then suddenly large. 10 minutes consistently practiced outweighs hours acquired through constant grind. And the implications stretch further. If reflection reframes experience so effectively, why do some people skip it and others gain so much from it? The answer points toward a principle beyond even reflection. What matters most is feedback. Because while reflection sharpens memory and insight, what truly determines whether mistakes vanish or repeat comes down to how quickly feedback itself is spotted and used. And that is where the next step leads. Why feedback loops beat endless grind? Why is it that one person keeps stumbling over the same mistake while another quickly adjusts and avoids it the next time? Both might have the same intelligence, motivation, and resources, yet their results drift apart. The difference lies in whether or not a feedback loop exists. Without feedback, work turns into random trial and error. With feedback, every action becomes a lesson, moving you forward more quickly. Think of feedback as the guardrails on a winding road. Without them, you might make progress for a while, but each bend could send you into a ditch. With them, even sharp turns stay manageable. The grinder pushes harder but repeats the same errors. The adapter collects signals and adjusts, saving effort while compounding progress. Take a task written as work on social media. At first glance, it feels like progress, something to check off. But what does it actually mean? You might brainstorm headlines, scroll through feeds for inspiration, adjust an image, or draft a few posts. At the end, there's no clear mark of success or failure. The goal was too vague to measure, so any outcome can be called progress or wasted time. Compare that to a loop-driven goal. Post one video today and track its engagement. Now you see data almost instantly. Did people watch? Did they react? The signal comes back quickly, so the next step becomes obvious. That difference, switching from vague effort to defined loop, separates endless grind from reliable growth. The mistake many teams make is treating feedback as something formal and infrequent. They wait for quarterly reviews, annual evaluations, or large debriefing meetings. By the time feedback finally arrives, months of preventable errors have already piled up. True feedback loops move faster. They are continuous, real-time, and often informal. You test something, observe what happens, and adjust. That process repeats in small cycles, sometimes daily or even hourly. Performance rises not by waiting for rare, aha moments, but through steady, compound adjustments. Modern organizations know this, which is why many are moving away from slow reviews toward continuous models. Workers share observations after each project, managers check in regularly, and digital tools make small inputs possible anytime. By definition, a loop should never sit idle. It runs continuously, shaping action while action is still in motion. For loops to produce value, the goals feeding into them must be clear. Vague ends create vague feedback, which is useless. If the instruction is be more creative, how will you know you succeeded? There's no metric, so any signal looks ambiguous. Now reframe with clarity, produce 3 headline options for the Friday campaign and compare which draws the highest clicks. Instantly, feedback is measurable. The data comes in, one option outperforms, and you learn what style resonates. A clear loop like this connects effort, signal, and lesson. Without clarity, people may grind for hours but never know if the result is worth repeating. With clarity, the same hours translate into structured learning. Grinding without feedback feels exhausting because hours vanish into silence. Imagine staying late, reshuffling dozens of slides, polishing every detail. By morning, a manager takes one glance and decides it isn't useful. All that time looks wasted, when really the waste was in running the process without checkpoints. Had you set feedback touchpoints earlier, you could have shifted course before finishing the entire slide deck. The grind might look impressive, hours of typing, long nights, but in the absence of feedback, it's still blind action. Real progress comes when loops send signals soon enough to guide the next step. Endless grind is not resilience, it's persistence without direction. Consider a team tasked with the nebulous goal: improve customer engagement. They brainstorm, debate, and build elaborate reports, yet at the end, no one knows whether engagement actually improved. There was no feedback loop to confirm progress. Now imagine the task reframed. Send one short customer survey this week, measure response rate, and adjust timing based on replies. Within days, the loop produces a clear signal. If response rates climb, keep going. If not, alter the approach next week. After a month, that team collects dozens of concrete lessons. Compare that with a month of grinding under the vague banner of improve. The first group moves quickly, guided by data. The second sinks into activity that feels busy but reveals little. This is the principle behind continuous feedback models in modern work. Instead of irregular performance reviews, teams exchange small signals on an ongoing basis. Internal chat platforms allow quick reactions to drafts. Dashboards display real-time trends so people see results rather than guess. Anonymous portals ensure even sensitive suggestions enter the loop. The shorter the delay between action and signal, the stronger the adjustment. If feedback comes only at the end of a project, the loop fails, the work cycle already passed. That is why companies build systems for immediate inputs. Transparency enhances it further. When employees see exactly how their input shape changes, trust builds, and engagement rises. Without transparency, feedback systems collapse into disbelief. Signals get sent but never visibly acted upon. Real-world teams are already proving the value. Research shows that organizations using continuous feedback experience faster course correction and higher employee engagement. Tools like Nitro or MatterApp are designed for short-cycle feedback, precisely because teams that install regular loops adapt more quickly and deliver better outcomes. The principle is not complicated. More frequent signals equal quicker learning. The execution challenge lies in building systems, tools, and habits that make those signals automatic. Other industries embed loops by necessity. Agile software development releases small increments of code, collects user response, and alters immediately. Product developers put early versions of products into customer hands before launch, adjusting based on reactions. Teachers use short quizzes, not just for grades, but to steer future lessons. Customer support teams send post-call surveys to measure satisfaction within minutes, tightening how they respond on the next call. Different fields, same pattern. Quick loops shorten the path from effort to adjustment. Improvement comes less from dramatic breakthroughs and more from consistent correction. For loops to sustain momentum, follow-up matters. If feedback is collected but never acted on, the loop breaks. Workers quickly stop offering input when they see no change. Healthy loops emphasize response. Leaders show visibly how input influenced the next step. Even a quick recap of here's what we heard, and here's what we adjusted maintains trust. Updating questions, clarifying goals, and refreshing the rules keeps data relevant. Leaders who model responsiveness encourage everyone else to do the same. If managers ignore signals, loops die quietly. If managers build visibly on them, the culture of iteration grows. Think again about the work on social media example. Imagine instead you choose one simple loop, post one video and measure engagement after 24 hours. Every day you collect a result, views or no views. Each small step contains a lesson. 10 videos in 10 days create 10 signals and 10 adjustments. Within 2 weeks, you hold a bank of evidence on what message resonates. Contrast that with 10 days of working on social media. You may end with drafts and designs, but nothing tested, nothing learned. One path feels lighter because the loop provides direction. The other path feels heavier because grind offered no proof of progress. This is the choice workers face daily. Some push harder, doubling hours, believing success is a matter of raw effort. But with no feedback, they can only repeat the same stalled path. Others rely on short loops and their improvement appears effortless, but it is not luck. It is iteration. Each loop directs the next. Over time, the difference grows wide. One burns out repeating old mistakes, the other advances steadily with less strain. The contrast does not lie in intelligence or determination, but in whether feedback loops exist. A simple practice you can try is this. If your work feels like endless grind, run a 3-day experiment. Pick one project and set up a tiny daily loop. Produce one draft, gather one reaction, make one adjustment. Just 3 cycles. You'll often find that this generates more progress in those 3 days than a week of grinding without signals. Small, rapid feedback not only boosts momentum, but also lowers stress, because the path is no longer guesswork. Feedback loops transform uncertain effort into structured learning. Grind without feedback is just time passing. Grind with rapid signals converts into growth, because each cycle guides the next. That is what separates the person who keeps repeating mistakes from the one who quickly adapts. Loops aren't a fancy idea reserved for software or corporate strategy. They're a survival tool whenever decisions repeat. In modern life, where demands multiply and time feels thin, loops tilt the balance between exhaustion and progress. But not every obstacle to progress is external. Even with feedback loops in place, there are patterns inside the mind that can consume hours without warning. These traps disguise themselves as effort but leave you stuck in invisible circles. And unlike bad scheduling or poor tools, they can pass unnoticed for years. Common thinking traps that kill hours. It's easy to blame external factors for lost time, meetings that drag on, notifications that interrupt, or schedules that overflow. But many of the most damaging time losses don't arrive from outside. They come from the patterns of thought inside your own head. Psychologists call these cognitive distortions, rigid filters that warp perception and steer energy into loops that look like effort but don't produce real progress. Cognitive behavioral research has cataloged many of these traps, from catastrophizing to mind reading, and each one captures attention in ways that feel active while delivering nothing. Spotting them becomes essential if you want your hours to count. Let's cut directly to the most common thinking traps that quietly steal entire afternoons, along with their telltale signs and practical counterplays. Perfection paralysis. The sign is simple. You keep adjusting details that don't matter, fonts, margins, tiny rephrasing, while the core work remains unfinished. The counterplay is to set a hard done timer. Ship a draft the moment that timer hits, even if it feels rough. Progress beats polish. Decision spaghetti. The signal here is being tangled in endless options without landing on one. You ask which project to start, then which step of that project, then which order those steps should follow, an endless web. The counterplay is to reduce choices to a binary and commit. Ask, if I had to pick in 10 seconds, which is it? Act on that answer. Action is the cure for indecision. Over-researching. The sign, your preparation phase stretches on far longer than the actual doing. Hours vanish into tabs and articles with no real movement closer to finishing. It masquerades as diligence but is actually avoidance. The counterplay, limit research time. Pick a cutoff, 30 minutes, an hour maximum, then force yourself to act with the information gathered. Knowledge supports action, but only up to the point where it delays it. Catastrophizing. This trap appears in how small problems balloon into imagined disaster. A slow reply to your email feels like a sign everything is failing. The spiral consumes energy without producing clarity. The counterplay is evidence checking. Ask, what facts do I actually have? Then redirect attention to the single next step you can control. Rumination stops once the brain sees that imagined outcomes lack evidence. Mind reading. This trap takes shape as silent assumptions about what others think. A colleague stays quiet, and you instantly know they disliked your idea, even though they said nothing. Hours vanish while you second-guess your own work. The counterplay is direct communication. Replace assumption with data by simply asking, "What are your thoughts?" Real feedback shatters imagined criticism. Blurred boundaries. The sign, your day fills with other people's priorities because you can't say no. Requests slide onto your plate while your own tasks wait. It feels cooperative, but over time it leaves you fatigued and scattered. The counterplay is practicing firm limits. Before agreeing, pause and ask, if I say yes, what will I postpone? If the cost is too high, decline or renegotiate. Protecting boundaries is not selfish, it's the structure that keeps progress possible. Notice the similarity across these traps. Each one imitates productive work. Perfection paralysis feels like improving. Decision spaghetti feels like careful analysis. Over-researching feels like thorough preparation. Catastrophizing seems like contingency planning. Mind reading feels like social awareness. Blurred boundaries feel like helpfulness. The disguise keeps them going because you believe you are moving forward. In truth, progress is delayed while hours disappear. The key lies in recognition. Most traps break the instant you notice them. Think of them as a mental loop running in the background, repeating until you pause it. A single pattern interrupt, naming it out loud, cuts the cycle. Say, I am catastrophizing, or this is perfection paralysis. The label pulls the thought back into consciousness where you can redirect it. This technique, common in CBT practice, reduces the grip by reframing distortions as patterns rather than truths. Let's put it into an everyday lens. You're writing a report. Perfection paralysis strikes, you've reset the font 3 times. Label it. That act is enough to send the reminder. The report still isn't finished. You cut the polishing, type the final section, and send the draft. What looked like a mountain of extra hours collapses into completion simply because the trap was caught. The time wasted is not the trap itself, but the moments you spend unaware you are in one. Consider also how these traps divert emotional energy. Catastrophizing drains calm by simulating outcomes your body reacts to as real. Mind reading undermines confidence by rehearsing critical voices that may not exist. Blurred boundaries pull energy outward into endless yeses. Left unchecked, they deplete motivation faster than actual workload. Workers who describe themselves as burned out often aren't overloaded by sheer tasks. They're overloaded by distorted thinking that makes every task heavier than it is. Each trap has a direct counter you can practice. For perfection paralysis, make completion your metric instead of quality. Deliver first, refine later. For decision spaghetti, impose artificial deadlines to finalize choices. Clarity grows in movement, not in pondering. For over-researching, pair gathering with immediate execution. Don't let preparation become its own project. For catastrophizing, collect factual evidence instead of imagined stories. Fear weakens when you demand proof. For mind reading, exchange assumption for dialogue. Ask and clarify. For blurred boundaries, say yes only when you understand the cost and willingly accept it. The entire practice can be condensed into 2 diagnostic questions. What evidence do I have for this thought? And what purpose does this serve me? Weak evidence and no purpose signal a trap. Strong evidence and clear purpose indicate real progress. These checkpoints strip away the illusion of busyness and show whether effort translates to outcome. The danger of thinking traps is not their existence, but their subtlety. Many productive-looking days disintegrate because 70% of the time was spent cycling through distortions. That's wasted not because the person lacked motivation, but because they lacked recognition. Once you practice awareness, the ratio reverses. You recover large blocks of time without working harder, simply by halting loops early. Entire projects accelerate with no change in resources, only in clarity about how mental traps were eating hours. Think of recognition as the ultimate productivity multiplier. If a machine kept running faulty code, the solution wouldn't be to work longer. It would be to debug the code. With traps, debugging means spotting the loop and shutting it down before it consumes the day. Productivity is not only about schedules or tools, it's about mental accuracy. Clear thinking saves more time than any software upgrade. That's why awareness of these traps marks the border between exhaustion and real momentum. Workers who burn hours stuck in loops often believe they need more discipline. Workers who spot the loops early discover they simply needed accurate vision. The difference is enormous. One path drains energy endlessly, the other conserves it for tasks that move the needle forward. Recognizing the patterns is the first step. Avoiding them consistently requires something deeper, a trained capacity for mental clarity under pressure. And clarity is not an inborn talent or a rare gift. It behaves more like a muscle, one that grows stronger the more you exercise it in small, deliberate ways. Mental clarity may look like a rare gift, but it is far less mysterious than most people believe. It functions much more like a trainable capacity than an inherited trait. Some people appear naturally composed under pressure, yet in many cases what you are seeing is not talent. It is the result of deliberate routines that strengthen their focus over time. Instead of weights or machines at the gym, the training tools for clarity are everyday practices that reduce noise, conserve attention, and restore presence when it drifts. Thinking of clarity this way, less as something handed down at birth and more as a skill built through consistent drills, changes the way you approach productivity entirely. The first drill worth mastering is single tasking blocks. It sounds obvious. Pick one task, work on it, finish it. But in practice, few manage to do this consistently. Most people shift between email, chat, browsing, and half-finished work within minutes of sitting down. What feels like multitasking is really task switching, and decades of research show that it comes at a huge cost. Each time you switch, you lose concentration from the previous task and invest extra energy to ramp focus back up again. Studies from UC Irvine suggest that after an interruption, it can take over 20 minutes to regain full focus, while workplace analytics firms report productivity losses approaching 40% when people jump repeatedly. Single tasking blocks reverse this waste. A simple model is 50 minutes of undistracted effort followed by a 10-minute pause. By honoring the brain's natural endurance and recovery cycle, you finish one meaningful chunk at a time rather than dissolving the day into fragments. Digital clutter clearing is another underrated exercise. Most people underestimate how many decisions are silently triggered by a cluttered desktop or a jammed inbox. Every unchecked notification signals unfinished demand. Dozens of files without order cue the brain to anticipate more complexity than truly exists. This drains focus before actual work begins. Weekly digital sweeps, archiving what is done, deleting what no longer matters, unsubscribing from irrelevant streams, reduce these background signals. Neuroscience shows that messy environments correlate with higher stress and slower task switching. By restoring order in digital spaces, you strip away subtle friction that blurs focus. When your laptop opens to clarity instead of clutter, the mind begins lighter and the workday stays steadier. The third drill is micro-meditation, sometimes only a minute or two long. Long retreats are helpful for those who choose them, but you don't need hours to build resilience. In fact, tiny practices scattered through the day create durable benefits. Waiting for a file to load, riding an elevator, or sitting in a meeting, these moments can become cues. Pause, notice the breath, drop attention into the present, and then return to the task. Research in management and healthcare settings shows that even very short mindfulness exercises lower stress and sharpen working memory. By practicing redirection in controlled micro-moments, you train an instinct that engages automatically under real pressure. Later, when an anxious spiral or urgent deadline hits, this habit kicks in, keeping you from losing hours in thought loops. None of these drills produce results from rare use. Just as one trip to the gym does not build lasting strength, doing a single 50-minute block, cleaning your inbox once, or meditating a few times achieves little. Consistency outweighs intensity. 10 minutes of practice repeated daily reshapes the patterns of attention in a way that occasional marathons cannot. Repetition is what teaches the brain that it can resist distraction, hold focus longer, and recover faster. Without repetition, old habits return easily. With it, clarity grows steadily. For many people, neglecting these routines creates heavier costs than they realize. Workdays fill with reflexive multitasking until the mind feels frayed by noon. Clutter piles up silently until every login feels like overload. Stressful thoughts filter through unchallenged until they hijack your concentration completely. Left unchecked, these small leaks expand into exhaustion and eventual burnout. Burnout rarely arrives from workload alone. It grows from the inability to clear accumulated noise. When clarity habits disappear, even moderate demands feel crushing. Now picture the opposite pattern. A person begins their morning with a locked-in 50-minute block, focusing solely on their most important project of the day while devices stay muted. Before a tense meeting, they pause for 120 seconds, notice breathing, and reset tension. Toward evening, they archive files and sweep their inbox, closing the day with clarity instead of clutter. Their workload is not smaller than anyone else's, but their habits have filtered the noise. When pressure spikes, they show steadiness not because they are gifted, but because they trained. The 50-10 block deserves a closer look for those trying it. The 10 minutes after the 50 are not a license to dive into distractions. The pause is a reset, stretch, step outside, drink water, practice a short breath. This rest cycle rebuilds focus for the next block. Athletes integrate rest between sets for strength to accumulate. The brain functions in the same rhythm. Workplace studies confirm that structured breaks prevent output from collapsing during long sessions. By adopting this cycle, you train the mind not only to focus, but also to sustain clarity across heavy days. Weekly digital sweeps also work best when pre-scheduled rather than left to chance. Reserve one fixed point in your calendar, Friday afternoon, Sunday evening, whenever the week feels ready to reset. In 15 minutes, clear the inbox, retire files, and delete irrelevant apps or tabs. This prevents clutter from turning into chaos. You enter each week with a lighter digital workspace, which helps you preserve mental bandwidth for tasks that truly matter. Analytics firms tracking remote workers report measurable productivity gains from consistent digital cleanup routines. Precisely because lower clutter reduces wasted searching and stress triggers. Micro-meditations function best when anchored to predictable triggers. Attach them to daily patterns you already experience, opening your laptop, waiting for your coffee, stepping into transit. These cues ensure practice happens without extra thought. Over weeks, the habit becomes reflexive. When true stress arrives, the brain recalls the training automatically. Responding with calm attention is no longer forced, it is practiced into instinct. Management researchers have observed that even a handful of short mindful resets across a day stabilizes performance scores, especially under high workload. To give these drills a specific shape, here is a starter routine tailored to younger professionals juggling study, work, and side hustles. Each day, carve out one 50-minute focus block for your highest priority personal task. Protect it from notifications, then follow with 10 minutes of reset, walk, stretch, add a 2-minute breath exercise. Once a week, run a 15-minute digital sweep to clear inbox and desktop clutter. Finally, pick one anchor in your daily transit or downtime, a bus ride, a line at the store, and use it for micro-meditation. These steps fit into crowded schedules, but together they grow substantial resilience for high-pressure weeks. When viewed this way, clarity is not mysterious or unreachable. It is built from ordinary routines practiced consistently. Each habit is small, but in aggregate they create a resilience buffer, the difference between a work week that snowballs into burnout and one that remains navigable despite pressure. Neglect leaves you vulnerable, but practicing these drills daily builds reliable strength. The outcome is not only surviving stress, but being able to perform meaningfully when distractions tug continuously. And this shift in personal clarity is not confined to the individual. Once practiced steadily, these patterns of clear choice and deliberate focus ripple outward into team settings. At that scale, the impact becomes visible in how projects move, how decisions unfold, and how smoothly work is handed off. Which raises the practical question: what does cultivated clarity actually look like when applied inside a modern workplace? Productivity in action, real scenarios. When clarity shifts from theory to practice, the difference is immediate. You can see it in how teams structure decisions, carry out tasks, and hand off work. Abstract phrases sound ambitious, but until they are translated into clear steps, they stay flat and unhelpful. The clearest way to understand this is by watching how two different groups handle identical goals. Picture Team A their whiteboard lists. Improve client engagement, update software platform, finish report. At first glance, the goals look serious, but inside the room, hesitation spreads. What counts as improving client engagement? Which part of the platform takes priority? Who finishes which section of the report? They nod, hold discussions, and talk themselves in circles. Hours pass and movement is negligible. The vagueness itself is the trap, although no one names it out loud. Now picture Team B facing the same goals. Their board looks similar at first, but with a crucial difference. Each entry is reframed as a rule. If it's Tuesday morning, then Sarah contacts 3 clients about new support options. If the code library shows 3 or more errors, then Adam updates it by 4 p.m. If it's Thursday at noon, then Lisa completes the first 2 pages of the report. Suddenly, it's not about broad ambition but defined trigger action pairs. The tone changes instantly. Uncertainty vanishes because decisions are already baked into the structure. Meetings end with assignments in motion, not more conversation. The handoff process makes this difference even sharper. In Team A's vague model, one person finishes part of a task but leaves no clear marker for the next. The following person wonders whether to start from scratch or adjust what's already there. Time is lost just clarifying ownership. In Team B's framework, the if-then statement defines both the task and its endpoint. The next worker knows exactly where to begin. Momentum continues because the transition carries no friction. Even stress plays out differently. Picture a meeting where the manager begins, "We need to make progress on the platform." No one argues, but instantly the questions flood in. Do they mean features, stability, or design tweaks? Everyone hesitates, and pressure grows as hours slip without action. Compare that to a check-in where the manager refers to, "If error count rises above 3, then Adam will fix the library by 4 p.m. It's precise. It's testable." If the condition triggers, the task completes. Anxiety doesn't spiral in silence, people act directly. The difference can look almost comedic if you watch side by side. Team A reads their vague bullet point and agrees solemnly, "Yes, we should definitely try to improve engagement," before drifting into speculation. Team B in the next room points at Sarah's explicit rule. She walks out, calls clients, and returns with real notes by the end of the meeting. One team generates conversation, the other generates progress. The lesson is simple. The quality of a plan depends less on how professional it looks and more on how specific it is. The effect compounds even further when technology is added. AI can multiply efficiency, but it cannot fix vagueness. A worker asking, "Help improve code," gets scattershot recommendations that may or may not matter. But tell AI, "If code fails 3 tests, then suggest debugging steps with explanations," and the machine operates with focus. Research from 2024 showed productivity in software development stalling under vague prompts, but soaring once instructions were framed as concrete actions. When AI is given vague prompts, it multiplies ambiguity. When prompts are clear, it multiplies results. Clarity doesn't compete with modern tools, it unlocks their full value. Flexibility in workplaces enhances this even further. Surveys show employees working flexibly report nearly 40% higher productivity and greater focus, plus significantly lower stress. The trick is what happens next. Autonomy gives energy back to workers, but clarity ensures the energy is used well. Employees who enjoy flexible conditions, yet fill their days with vague ideals often drift. Those who combine flexibility with specific rules harness both freedoms at once. Remote workers using a structure like, if it's 10 a.m., then schedule 2 client emails before lunch turn autonomy into measurable progress. The hybrid model gains not just satisfaction, but consistent, trackable results. Ignoring clarity and flexibility together explains much of why burnout has risen. Recent figures showed more than 40% of workers reporting symptoms, with inflexible schedules strongly correlated to higher exhaustion. Lack of clarity exacerbates the load. Longer hours spent caught in undefined expectations, grinding without closure. When staff instead set clear conditions and work under flexible schedules, burnout declines. Progress becomes obvious, rest feels earned, and each day closes without the sense that nothing was truly finished. Look again at practical examples. A consulting team tasked vaguely to update the client platform quickly collapses into argument over which upgrades take priority. Deadlines slide, frustration rises, and client confidence erodes. But the same team using concrete if-then rules changes trajectory. If client A requests integration this week, then engineer deploys the patch by Friday. If test results show 0.2-second delay, then another engineer optimizes Module 3. The tweaks may look unremarkable, but they prevent endless speculation. Clients receive tangible progress each week, and trust deepens. Clarity even prevents duplication, one of the silent killers of morale. In vague systems, 2 employees might both work on report improvements, each editing the same section differently. Effort doubles and frustration sets in. In an if-then system, rules divide naturally. If it's Thursday at noon, Lisa drafts the introduction. If it's Friday morning, James edits the data section. Overlap disappears. Energy is conserved. Each contribution feels valued because it sits in a distinct slot. And when the system is adopted, workers often report immediate relief. They notice that the sensation of spinning wheels fades. Instead of wondering what progress looks like, they can point to specific actions completed. Each closed condition reinforces momentum. Over weeks, projects that once stalled halfway through now reach closure consistently. The subjective sense of progress is as important as the objective results, both reduce stress and support morale. The encouraging part is that none of this requires top-down reform. Teams don't need mass reorganization or software overhauls. The shift can start with a single list or project board. Turn 3 vague phrases into 3 if-then statements and measure the effect over 2 days. Often, the outcome is striking enough that other team members adopt the same structure voluntarily. The method spreads because results are visible fast. Unlike abstract philosophies, this approach sells itself in day-to-day relief. For individuals, the practice is equally powerful. You don't need an entire team to see the benefit of reframing. Right, if noon arrives, then step away for lunch without checking messages. Or, if meeting ends, then log 2 actions in 10 minutes. These rules spare you hours of wasted hesitation. They build a personal routine of closure and progress no less real than at corporate scale. Over time, the small gains stack, and the stress that once permeated ordinary tasks steadily recedes. Clarity in practice often looks unremarkable, just rules on a board or a handful of sentences in a notebook. But the visible effects are dramatic. Instead of groups drowning in vague ambition, you see people moving steadily through defined steps. Instead of heated debates over what to prioritize, the priority reveals itself through fixed triggers. Confusion narrows and output expands. The transformation comes not from harder effort, but from sharper structure. If you want proof, you rarely need numbers or reports, just watch 2 groups in parallel. One repeats slogans in circles, the other executes rules and moves forward. The outcome over weeks is undeniable. The gap in performance and morale stems directly from whether tasks were codified clearly or left to drift. The simplest way to test this is by running your own short experiment. Take one phrase from your current list, something vague like improve outreach, and translate it into a concrete condition and action. Then trial it for a day or two. You'll notice progress in that one area even before the week ends. That small evidence is enough to show the difference clarity makes. And once you experience that difference firsthand, you may find yourself wondering how to extend it beyond a single task. Turning stress lists into clear action was one step. Applying them to teams in motion showed another. But even at the level of personal thought, the same issue returns. Scattered, messy ideas resist action until they're given structure. And structure is where the next tool enters, helping anyone organize disordered thoughts quickly into steps that make sense. Templates that organize any thought. Thinking often rushes ahead faster than it can be organized. You open your notes or a to-do app, and within minutes it resembles a scattered dump of phrases, half-tasks, and vague intentions. Work on project. Get healthier. Plan event. Nothing is wrong with the intentions themselves, but without structure, nothing connects. The brain keeps seeing unfinished puzzles. That's why so many planners feel overwhelming. They capture content but don't shape it. What makes the difference is adding simple frames that force thoughts into order. These aren't complicated systems or sophisticated apps. They are sentence structures, mental scaffolds, that reduce chaos to something the brain can act on immediately. There are 3 practical formats you can begin using today. Each strips vagueness away by forcing definition. And each one works because psychology research, most notably Peter Galwitzer's studies on implementation intentions, shows that when you tie a situation to a defined action, follow-through improves dramatically. In practice, these short prompts behave like automatic instructions. Instead of redeciding daily, you execute what's already been set. The first frame is the if right arrow then statement. This is as simple as, if condition, then action. It turns life's open-ended triggers into direct responses. Students can write, if it's 8 p.m., then I'll review one lecture summary. Side hustlers can try, if I finish dinner, then I'll schedule tomorrow's client post. In social life, it might be, if it's Saturday morning, then I'll message 2 friends to meet this week. The clarity snaps into place instantly. The condition arrives, and the action follows. There's no added debate. Decades of studies back the effect. Implementation intentions enhance follow-through because the brain is no longer asked to deliberate in the moment. The rule is already installed. The second format is the today I will frame. It looks like this. Today I will accomplish specific outcome by specific action. Unlike the if right arrow then model that links a trigger to behavior, this frame locks down daily priorities so that your goals are converted into evidence by the end of the day. A student might use, today I will accomplish revising my essay by writing 500 words this afternoon. Someone balancing a side project might note, today I will accomplish outreach by emailing 3 potential partners before lunch. Social context works too. Today I will accomplish connection by calling my sister at 7 p.m. because the sentence forces you to state both a result and a means. Vagueness dies quickly. There's no escape into abstract terms like work harder or catch up. You've nailed down what matters and how it will be achieved. The third structure is who does what by how much. Borrowed from consulting strategy work, this one is especially useful in group projects, side ventures, and workplaces. The frame demands 3 answers. Who is the audience or actor? What is the specific behavior? By how much will it shift? Consider a campaign manager. Who? Newsletter subscribers. Does what? Open the new weekly email. By how much? 20% increase over last month. Students can use it too. Who me? Does what? Solve past exam problems. By how much? 2 full sets before Friday. Even in something social. Who? Roommates. Does what? Contribute to shared dinner. By how much? Each cooks once this week. The act of quantification eliminates the slipperiness of do better or improve engagement. Instead, you produce a measurable target that can be tracked. Progress is no longer subjective, it's countable. Why do these frames make such a difference? Because they pull thought out of the fog of memory and pin it down on a page. The brain struggles to juggle multiple vague items, but when you pour them into a sentence with strict boundaries, you take load off working memory. The instruction exists outside, ready to be executed. Neuroscience is consistent on this point. When tasks are unstructured, the prefrontal cortex spends energy trying to interpret what still needs to be done. Every glance at a vague task reopens the loop. Write the same intention into a structured line, and the loop closes when the condition is met or the action is taken. The stress evaporates because you're no longer guessing. The problem in many workplaces is that lists are built on fragments. Prepare meeting, check invoices, talk to John. Each is technically valid but experientially heavy. Workers reopen the guesswork every time they encounter them. Instead, reframed as structured instructions, these tasks transform. If it is 3 p.m., then review the finance spreadsheet for errors. Today I will accomplish follow-up by replying to 3 client emails before 5 p.m. Who? John. Does what? Sign off on draft. By how much? Approval by Wednesday. Suddenly, the same list is not a fog but a pathway. Items activate into action. Opening the list feels like guidance, not weight. The same applies to personal planning. Many people start a week with noble but blurred intentions like exercise more, eat healthier, or get organized. Those intentions rarely become outcomes because they demand on-the-spot clarification. Instead, rewrite using frames. If it is Tuesday 6 p.m., then I'll walk 30 minutes. Today I will accomplish healthy eating by ordering a salad at lunch. Who? Me. Does what? Clear desk surface. By how much? Before dinner cleanup. Now what once sat in a vague stress cloud becomes executable. The mental relief is noticeable as soon as the pen hits paper or the line appears in your notes app. Using these sentence structures also throttles procrastination. Often what looks like laziness is really the brain avoiding ambiguity. Unclear tasks carry invisible friction. Break the fog with a frame and the hesitation fades. You no longer fight yourself to be disciplined. Action flows because the decision was already made. This explains why structured intentions consistently outperform motivational slogans. Work hard does not equal movement. Today I will accomplish contacting 3 prospects by sending direct emails does. Here's a practical test you can run right now. Take 3 vague lines from your to-do list. For each, rewrite it using one of the formats above. Then try executing those rephrased versions over the next day. Notice which one clears quickest and feels least like a burden. Chances are you'll see tasks finish faster with less resistance. To anchor the lesson further, write one of your rewrites in the comment section below. Hearing how others phrase theirs often sparks new formats you may adopt. Sharing reinforces the shift away from vague planning and makes the method concrete. A few points of variation help keep the practice sustainable. You don't need to use one structure exclusively. Rotate depending on context. Use if right arrow then when cues matter. If meeting ends, then log notes within 10 minutes. Use today I will for daily focus. Today I will accomplish financial planning by adjusting March budget by noon. Use who does what by how much for outcome tracking in groups or projects. 3 frames can cover most scenarios without bulking your notes with complication. Variety keeps your lists lively and prevents the exercise from feeling mechanical. The truth is you don't need elaborate tools. Many apps on the market offer sleek interfaces but let anything into the task line. That flexibility is why the same apps become cluttered graveyards. The issue has never been storage, it has been structure. By requiring yourself to use frames as an entry ticket, you filter vagueness before it has a chance to multiply. This doesn't demand expensive software. A notebook works just as well. The difference lies in discipline. Only allow framed sentences into your system. Half-formed thoughts stay out until they can be cast into clarity. Across a project, this approach changes the group dynamic. A manager posting prepare launch materials sets up a dozen interpretations. People repeat work, overlook tasks, and drift. Restructure with frames and those problems shrink. If draft is finished by Wednesday, then send it to 3 reviewers. Today we will accomplish testing by checking 5 key features before evening. Who? Design team. Does what? Update 2 screen flows. By how much? Complete by Thursday. Suddenly the pieces fit together. There are fewer clarifications, fewer duplicate efforts, and measurable checkpoints. Conflict over what's next shrinks and output rises. Another benefit is how these frames reduce stress almost immediately. Ambiguity is a stress trigger because the brain treats every unclear task as unresolved. Each time you see it, the nervous system spikes slightly, anticipating a problem. Turning vague ideas into structured lines calms that reaction. It's why people report lists feeling lighter once rephrased. You relieve the brain from decoding. Clarity lowers anxiety as much as it increases efficiency. In that way, frames are not just productivity hacks, they are also stress reducers. You'll never need a long catalog of formats. A core set of 3 to 4 covers nearly everything. If right arrow then, today I will, who does what by how much, and sometimes a simple time action pairing. At 2 p.m., I'll finish the draft. Apply them consistently, and your raw notes reform into instructions rather than fragments. Patterns emerge, tasks close, and reflection becomes clearer. Over time, this doesn't just make you faster, it helps you see exactly where methods succeed or fail. That ongoing learning compounds. So here's the invitation. Don't let another week drift by with vague lists. Test one of these frames on your most stubborn task today. Recast it in clear form, follow it, and watch how much faster you close the loop. It may feel small, but that tiny structural shift is exactly how momentum builds. Once you taste the relief of clarity, it becomes hard to return to ambiguity. When you look at the bigger picture, these short phrasing tools are not just organizational tricks. They reveal something deeper. That overwhelm, traps, and wasted energy all stem from unclear thought. And once you see the patterns of clarity working line by line, it becomes easier to recognize where the real source of productivity hides. Why clear thinking equals hidden productivity power? Clear thinking isn't just a nice habit, it is untapped productivity power. Research shows the average worker is actively productive for under 3 hours a day, with the rest eaten by distraction and indecision. That number highlights the gap, not a lack of hours, but a lack of structure in how those hours are used. Clarity closes that gap fast. A single if-then instruction can recover time that vague goals waste. Try it today. Pick one foggy task, rewrite it as a sharp rule, and see the difference. Share your test in the comments within 48 hours. Marcus used short rules to steer an empire. You can use them to steer your day.